Most people think Ducati's MotoGP engine was just a beast no one could handle. But after going through hours of race footage and technical breakdowns, we found out it was way more complicated. Some riders were destroyed by it, others became unbeatable with it, and in this video, we'll show you how Ducati's radical engine design turned MotoGP upside down. When Ducati came back to MotoGP in 2003 with the Desmosedici GP3, it wasn't just a return. It was a shockwave through the racing world. Imagine being away from Grand Prix racing for 30 years and then showing up with a machine so wild, so advanced, that even the best riders struggled to tame it. That's exactly what Ducati did. The Desmosedici changed how people thought about MotoGP engines. So how did it all begin? Well, in 2002, MotoGP switched from the old-school 500cc two-stroke monsters to 990cc four-stroke prototypes. Most of the Japanese giants, Honda, Yamaha, and Suzuki, played it safe. They built inline-four engines based on what they already knew from their street bikes. Ducati, though, decided to flip the script. They thought, why copy when you can reinvent? That's where the story of the Desmosedici really kicks off. The project officially started in 2001, led by Filippo Preziosi, a brilliant engineer who would later be remembered as one of the sport's great innovators. Even the name Desmosedici carried a story. Desmo pointed to Ducati's trademark Desmodromic valve system, a clever design that uses cams instead of springs to close the valves. And Sedici is Italian for 16, referring to the 16 valves inside its roaring V4 engine. This wasn't just a tweak of an old idea, it was Ducati rewriting the rulebook. At first, Ducati thought about sticking to their roots and building a massive V-twin. On paper, it seemed smart. The rules gave twin-cylinder bikes a weight advantage, and Ducati had decades of experience with L-twin engines. But then the engineers ran the numbers. To get the power MotoGP demanded, over 220 horsepower, a twin would need to scream past 17,000 RPM. That meant a ridiculously short stroke and a bore so wide that combustion would become messy and unreliable. Simply put, it wouldn't work. So Ducati went bold with the V4, combining their signature Desmo tech with raw Italian engineering passion. The result? A bike that sounded different, looked different, and rode like nothing else on the grid. And from that moment, MotoGP would never be the same. Now here's where things really get interesting. The engine itself. Ducati didn't just build a V4, they reimagined it. They called it a double twin. Basically, two of their legendary V-twins bolted together side by side. The result was a 90-degree V4, liquid-cooled, displacing 989 cubic centimeters. This setup would go on to become one of the most successful racing platforms ever. On paper, the Desmosedici's specs in 2003 were jaw-dropping. We're talking a 90-degree V4 producing more than 250 horsepower at a screaming 16,500 RPM, all packed into a bike weighing just 148 kilos. Flat out, it could push past 320 kilometers per hour. That's over 200 miles per hour. But the real magic wasn't just the numbers, it was how the engine made its power. Ducati introduced something radical called the twin pulse firing order. Instead of the usual smooth, evenly spaced pulses you'd expect from a four-cylinder, Ducati offset the crank pins by 70 degrees. That created a firing sequence at 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 290 degrees, and 380 degrees. The outcome was that the V4 didn't sound like a typical 4 at all. It thumped and roared like a giant V-twin. Riders said it gave them a better feel for traction, almost like the bike was talking to them through the rear tire. But the real ace up Ducati's sleeve was their Desmodromic valve system. While other manufacturers stuck to conventional valve springs, Ducati doubled down on their unique Desmo tech. Here's the problem with springs. At insane RPMs, think 17,000 or 18,000, they simply can't keep up. The valves start floating, timing goes off, and the engine loses performance or worse, fails. Ducati's Desmo system avoided that by using mechanical actuators to both open and close the valves. No springs, no float, just perfect timing every single cycle. This let the Desmosedici rev safely to nearly 18,000 RPM, use super aggressive cam profiles, and breathe like a beast at high RPM, where MotoGP bikes live. In simple terms, it meant the Ducati could push harder, rev higher, and stay consistent while the others hit their limits. That's why people called the engine impossible. It wasn't just raw power, it was control at speeds where everything else started to fall apart. But what happens when you bring an impossible engine into a sport built on strict limits and traditions? When Ducati finally rolled the Desmosedici onto the MotoGP grid in 2003, the impact was immediate. Loris Capirossi, riding the brand-new GP3, shocked everyone by qualifying on the front row at the season opener in Japan. And then, as if to prove it wasn't a fluke, he brought the bike home on the podium in its very first race. Think about that. After 30 years away from Grand Prix racing, Ducati not only showed up, they were fighting at the very front straight away. The success didn't stop there. Just a few rounds later, Capirossi snatched victory at Catalunya, handing Ducati their very first MotoGP win. By the end of that debut season, Ducati finished second in the Constructors' Championship, right behind Honda, no small feat given Honda's dominance at the time. And if that wasn't enough, the Desmosedici also smashed speed records, clocking over 202 miles per hour on the straights. This bike was a rocket ship, but raw speed came with a catch. The Ducati was devastatingly fast, especially in a straight line, but it was also notorious for being difficult to handle. It was wild, unpredictable, and demanded everything from the rider. Some called it untamable. Others said it was a machine built for only the bravest and most skilled. And for a while, that reputation stuck. Then came 2007 and Casey Stoner. The young Australian brought something no one else had, a dirt track-inspired riding style that let him wrestle the Desmosedici into submission. Where others fought against the bike, Stoner seemed to flow with it. The result was pure domination. That year, Stoner put on a masterclass. 10 wins out of 18 races, a 125-point gap over Dani Pedrosa, and most importantly, Ducati's first ever MotoGP Riders' Championship. It was also their only one until Pecco Bagnaia finally repeated the feat in 2022. Stoner proved what many thought was impossible, that Ducati's fire-breathing monster could not only be tamed, but turned into a championship-winning weapon. And in doing so, he cemented both his name and the Desmosedici's legacy in MotoGP history. The bike that carried Casey Stoner to glory in 2007 was the Desmosedici GP7, the first 800cc version of Ducati's beast. On paper, it was still the same fire-breathing monster, terrifying in its straight-line speed. But here's the twist. Stoner made it look easy. Later, he admitted the GP7 wasn't really good at anything, apart from blasting down the straights in 4th and 5th gear. Yet somehow, in his hands, that was more than enough. His dirt track-inspired style allowed him to dance with the Ducati, where others fought it. And that's the key. While Stoner dominated, his teammate Loris Capirossi struggled. He finished 7th that season, a massive 201 points behind Stoner. That gap said everything about the Desmosedici. It was never a plug-and-play bike like some of the Hondas or Yamahas. For one rider, it could be a championship-winning weapon. For another, it was almost unrideable. This Jekyll and Hyde nature became part of Ducati's MotoGP identity for years. But Ducati wasn't content with just brute power. They started looking at areas others weren't even thinking about, like aerodynamics. In 2015, they shocked the paddock by slapping winglets on the Desmosedici. At first, everyone laughed and called it over the top. But once they saw the results, the tune changed quickly. The winglets made the bike more stable under hard braking, stopped it from constantly wheeling under acceleration, and even improved cornering stability at insane speeds. Suddenly, Ducati wasn't just the loudest and fastest on the straights. They had control to match. Before long, every other manufacturer was bolting wings onto their own bikes. What began as Ducati's crazy experiment became the new normal in MotoGP, and they didn't stop there. Next came the ride height devices, which some call MotoGP's legal DRS. The idea was brilliant. Lower the bike's center of gravity during acceleration, and you get less wheelie, better aero, and faster lap times. It was like giving the Ducati a boost button for straights. Riders could unleash the full power of the engine without fighting the front wheel in the air. Once again, Ducati set the trend, and the rest of the grid had no choice but to follow. Now, if you've ever heard a Ducati Desmosedici blast past on a straight, you know it doesn't sound like any other MotoGP bike. That unique roar comes from its twin-pulse firing order, one of the most distinctive features of the V4 Ducati designed it to mimic the feel and rhythm of a massive V-twin, and it completely changed the way the bike behaved. Here's how it works. Instead of firing its cylinders evenly like most four-cylinder engines, the Desmosedici fires at 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 290 degrees, and 380 degrees. That means 2 quick power punches, followed by a longer pause. The effect was better traction, especially when the bike is digging out of corners. Riders say it makes throttle response smoother and corner exits far more controlled. In a sport where races are often decided by who gets the best drive out of a bend, this firing order gave Ducati a serious edge. And of course, it gave the bike that deep, thunderous soundtrack that fans fell in love with. The unmistakable sound of Ducati dominance. Fast forward to the modern era, and Ducati's philosophy is thriving. After Casey Stoner left, Ducati went through a long, dry spell in terms of titles. But then came Francesco Bagnaia, who finally turned potential into glory. In 2022, Bagnaia pulled off something legendary. He clawed back from a massive 91-point deficit, the biggest comeback in MotoGP history, to win Ducati's first Riders' Championship since Stoner. And he didn't stop there. In 2023, he defended his crown, becoming the first Ducati rider to win back-to-back titles. What makes Bagnaia's run so special is that it proved Ducati had struck the perfect balance. The Desmosedici was still blisteringly fast, but now it was more rideable, more refined, and no longer the wild beast that only a rare talent like Stoner could tame. Bagnaia showed that the bike was about consistency, adaptability, and championship-winning pace. With Ducati leading innovation in aerodynamics, ride height devices, and engine philosophy, Bagnaia's success confirmed what fans already knew. The Desmosedici is the benchmark of modern MotoGP. But here's the real question. If Ducati has already rewritten the rulebook, what impossible trick could they possibly pull off next in 2025? Well, 2025 feels like the start of a brand new chapter for Ducati. Marc Marquez, one of the greatest riders in MotoGP history, has joined the factory team alongside Francesco Bagnaia. Between them, they bring a staggering 11 world titles, making this the most explosive rider pairing we've seen in years. And the scary part? Early testing already showed Marquez looking completely at home on the new GP25. That tells us the Desmosedici has evolved into something deadly, still brutally fast, but now refined enough that even a rider switching brands after a decade can feel comfortable right away. If preseason whispers are anything to go by, Ducati could be on the verge of rewriting the record books. The long-standing mark of 14 wins in a single season, set by Honda back in 2014, is suddenly under real threat. With Bagnaia's smooth consistency and Marquez's aggressive brilliance, Ducati has all the ingredients to dominate 2025 like no team before. But here's the thing about the Desmosedici. It earned its legendary reputation, not because it was easy to ride, but because it was so hard. People called it impossible, and in a way they were right. For years, it was a bike that separated the extraordinary from the merely great. If you didn't have the right mix of talent, fearlessness, and commitment, the Ducati would chew you up. That difficulty was the very essence of Ducati's philosophy. While the Japanese factories often focused on making their bikes smooth, predictable, and friendly for riders, Ducati went the other way. They built for pure, uncompromising speed, even if that meant the bike was brutal to handle. The result was a machine that rewarded genius riders like Stoner, Dovizioso, and Bagnaia with glory, while punishing anyone who wasn't willing to push to the absolute limit. There was no middle ground. You either mastered it or it mastered you. And that's why the Desmosedici has always been special. It was never just another MotoGP bike. It was a challenge, a test of skill, and for those who could tame it, the gateway to greatness. The Ducati Desmosedici built a legend. Part of that legend came from how notoriously difficult the bike was to ride. Even Valentino Rossi, the greatest rider of all time by many accounts, couldn't make it work during his Ducati years from 2011 to 2012. If Rossi, with all his talent and experience, couldn't tame it, Then what did that say about this machine? It only added to the mystique, making the Desmosedici feel less like a motorcycle and more like a mythical beast that only a chosen few could control. That's why Casey Stoner's 2007 championship still feels so incredible. He didn't just win on the Ducati, he dominated. While others wrestled with the same bike, Stoner made it look effortless, like the Desmosedici was built just for him. Fast forward to Bagnaia's recent titles, and the story's the same. He found a rhythm with the machine that others couldn't, turning a bike with a fearsome reputation into a winning weapon. That's what makes their achievements stand out. They weren't just victories, they were proof that the impossible could be mastered. But the legacy of the Desmosedici isn't just about trophies and records. Its influence spilled out of MotoGP and onto the streets. Ducati didn't keep the secrets of its race bike locked away, they shared them. The Desmosedici Stradale engine, a direct descendant of the racing power plant, became the heart of the Bagnaia V4, one of the most jaw-dropping superbikes money can buy. And it wasn't just the engine. Those crazy-looking winglets that once caused debates in MotoGP are now part of street-going superbikes. The advanced electronic aids, traction control, riding modes, launch control, all of them trace their DNA back to Ducati's experiments on the MotoGP grid. What started as impossible engineering for the racetrack eventually became everyday performance tech for riders on the road. So it's safe to say that Ducati changed the whole sport. Their success with the Desmosedici forced every other manufacturer to rethink the way they built MotoGP bikes. Suddenly, aerodynamics became a battleground, with every team rushing to design their own winglets and aero packages. Electronics also took center stage, with advanced rider aids becoming standard. And perhaps most importantly, Ducati reshaped engine philosophy itself, proving that the balance between raw power and readiability could be redefined. The numbers back it up. Since their return in 2003, Ducati has collected 3 Riders' Championships, Stoner in 2007 and Bagnaia in 2022 and 2023, along with multiple constructors' titles and a near-permanent spot in the top 3. On top of that, the Desmosedici has consistently been one of the fastest bikes on the grid, often smashing speed records. Technically, Ducati also led the way with breakthroughs. The first winglets in MotoGP, the pioneering of ride height devices, and their unique Desmodromic valve system, the only one of its kind still used at this level. When people say Ducati broke MotoGP, it's not because they ruined it, it's because they shattered all the old assumptions. They proved that technologies most dismissed, like Desmo valves, weren't just viable but superior. They showed that wild ideas like winglets and ride height devices could reshape the future of racing. And maybe most importantly, they proved that European engineering, powered by Italian passion, could go toe-to-toe with Japanese giants and win. The beauty of the